Tim, you're muted.
Muted. You're muted.
I thought I was unmuted, sorry. Hey, welcome everybody. My name's Tim Hansen from Our Saviors in Sun Prairie, and I'm fortunate enough to serve on the Immigration Reform and Refugee Resettlement team in the Synod. And welcome to another event of a series that we are trying to find ways to educate and work towards advocacy. And so we're glad that you could be with us tonight and to hear Mary Campbell and what she has to say. We're really excited about that coming up. And so we're going to be recording this. So if people don't have a chance to be here with us tonight, they can catch up later on and check things out. And we will be at the end having kind of a Q&A. And so if you have questions that you'd like to ask Mary, you can certainly put those in the chat. And my friend Kyle will be picking those up as he moderates that Q&A towards the end. But in order to begin, I'd love to offer a word of prayer. So let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of your love, for the gift of encouragement, for the gift of wisdom, for the gift of spark. And as we celebrated Pentecost last week, the gift of the Spirit that continues to prod us into action, to love and care for our neighbors. And so we ask that you would bless our time tonight, that you would open our hearts and minds, that we might hear this news and find ways that we can serve others. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm going to turn this over to Kyle Minden, who works with the Lutheran Office for Public Policy in Wisconsin, and invite Kyle to tell you a little bit how this is going to run tonight. So Kyle, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. My name is Kyle from the Lutheran Office for Public Policy in Wisconsin. Thank you all so much for being here. And before we get started, I just wanted to go through some quick Zoom etiquette and then the schedule for this evening. So we'd ask that everyone would stay muted during our presentation today. And if you have any questions at any time during Mary's presentation, please put them in the chat and I will be collecting those for Q&A at the end. Finally, we're just going to, I'm going to pass it off to Reverend Walter Bayers to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Mary Campbell from AMMPARO. So Reverend Bayers, I will pass it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce Mary Campbell, our good friend. Mary is the program director for AMMPARO, the ELCA strategy to accompany migrant minors with protection, advocacy, representation, and opportunities, seeing its overwhelming approval by the 2016 Choose-Why Assembly. Her work currently involves organizing congregational and synodical engagement with migrant children and families, as well as pro bono legal work on their behalf. She was a missionary in El Salvador in the 1990s. Mary, we are so happy to have you here among us.
Thank you so much. And Walter, you and I go way back to that time. You were one of my people that was able to orient me, to the church in El Salvador. And so and accompany me through a part of that time. So I wanted to just say thank you for that. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you about Amparo and all of the things that are happening there. And I'm going to share my screen right now. And I've got a brief PowerPoint. I really hope that we will have at least half of the time that we have tonight so that we can have some conversation. If you have any questions, you'll be able to ask them. And I'm really happy to be able to talk to you about how we can move forward to bring justice for migrants in our communities. Well, as Walter just has already stated to you, the Amparo strategy was adopted by the Churchwide Assembly in August of 2016. And we were pretty amazed that the vote at that time, considering that there's still pretty much controversy about immigration, was a vote of 922 to 11. That's really amazing considering the breadth of the differences in our church having to do with immigration. The word for the strategy, Amparo, comes from Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And so you can see it here in English, but also in Spanish, Dios es nuestro amparo y fortaleza. You're also seeing it in Arabic, and the word for refuge in Psalm 46 is Malya. And you're seeing it in traditional Chinese characters. And in Chinese, it will be Vailazo. I can't tell you exactly where it is in there, but the characters are there. So this strategy is really the way that we have been walking as the ELCA with migrants and immigrants and in our church now since 2016, and even some of the projects that started before that. Amparo is a holistic whole church response. And here's the one statement that we always have for people to summarize what is Amparo about. Amparo was envisioned to accompany children and their families today and in the future who are forced to flee their communities. When we talk about it being a holistic response, it really involves the fact that we have work in countries of origin with people working on root causes of migration, but also people who have been deported and returned from the United States and Mexico back to their countries in origin. And I'm going to tell you a lot more about that part of the work. We have accompaniment in transit and in destination countries like the United States. But in the recent years with the past administration, we also had to look at accompaniment in countries of contention and those safe third-party agreements that were being made with countries in Central America. And so it really covers wherever a migrant or immigrant might be in the journey, there is accompaniment available. When we talk about it being a whole church response, we're talking about not just our members, synods, and our congregations in engaging with this, as well as the church-wide office, but we also extend this to the ELCA companions, the companion churches that we've had and organizations, and as well as our partners in the United States, partners such as Church World Service and Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. But we're also talking about our ecumenical partners and interfaith partners. Immigration is such a very large and complex question these days that no one church can have all the answers or have all of the programs that can help to serve people that are in the migrant journey. The PARO is really important because it kind of summarizes the activities that we do in Amparo. And you're going to hear a little bit more about all of these as I proceed further through this. Protection involves things such as our guardian angel programs. We also have congregations accompanying people.
The square one is what I'm working on now.
Advocacy is really important. We are very blessed in the ELCA to have actually working in the same area as Kyle is working right now. We have a migration policy director in Washington, D.C. Her name is Giovanna Oaxaca. She is a DACA recipient. We're very blessed to have the work that she's been able to do with us to raise the voice of the church in the federal circles, especially this year when so much is available for us to advocate about, to make changes. There's a real hope that we will be able to see comprehensive immigration reform and important changes within the next 2 years. Representation is a little bit unique in the sense that not all churches are engaged as much in that. Some are, some aren't. But one of the beautiful things about it is that for lawyers such as myself who have been ELCA members, we are given the opportunity to network together and to help work together to take pro bono cases with local legal service organizations in our area. For example, I am one of the volunteer pro bono lawyers for the National Immigrant Justice Center in Chicago. And it's really been wonderful to be able to work with them because they have such expertise in these various areas that each time I take a case, they have the right accompaniment for me to be able to help answer my questions and help me to do what needs to be done. But not only that, we've been able to bring our lawyers together to do some activities together. For example, we went to the Family Detention Center in Dilley, Texas, and we're part of a group of 30 lawyers that were helping there were 130 women In that facility, had mothers and heads of household that had to go through credible fear interviews, and we helped all 130 win their interviews that week. And what that meant for those 130 families is they were able to be released from Dilley. Opportunities involves welcoming and sanctuary congregations, and we actually have a couple of them represented today in the group, so you may hear some more about that possibly. We also have the work that we do with companions in Central America and Mexico with deported and returned migrants. So those are some of the activities that you're going to be hearing about and ways that you can get yourself involved in those, or your congregation. I've divided this presentation into our guiding principles. Amparo has 4 guiding principles: accompaniment, awareness building, advocacy, and articulation. So first I'm going to start with accompaniment. One of the things that we always talk about is why are children, youth, and families fleeing Central America? Violence is really the principal cause. Obviously, poverty and economic hardship, are present, particularly as people in Central America have experienced significant amounts of climate change. You'll remember that there were 2 hurricanes that hit Honduras last year. Corruption is also a very, very important issue. At this moment in time, there are questions about all 3 countries in Central America and the way their leaders are operating. You may have heard some things about the fact that the brother of the president of Honduras was recently convicted of drug dealing, and the president himself was actually named as one of the recipients of the funds that were used for the drug dealing for his campaign. In El Salvador, there's some very serious questions about the super mandate that the president received and some of the actions that he has recently taken by removing, that have been taken by the legislature to remove the Supreme Court, the judges, as well as the Attorney General. And the questions about what will happen as one party becomes more authoritarian. Questions about corruption also are very highly present in Guatemala. Internal displacement is a very serious issue, and many times the governments in the region have not been looking at ways of helping people who are forced to flee one community find a safe place to live within the country. And so that helps to contribute to people feeling that they must make the migrant journey. So one of the niches that Amparo has had has been working particularly with deported and returned migrants, and we've been doing this since 2015. Here you will see a couple of young people. The young man, Sergio, who is on the left there, was an individual who fled Honduras and his community when his mother and he both felt that the community and his school were no longer safe because of criminal activities that were happening there. He went to live with his father in Ohio, but as he was undocumented, as soon as he started driving, he could not get a driver's license, and he ended up being deported, not once, but actually several times. Each time he would come back because he had started to make a life in the United States and even had a family. But finally his family talked to him about the fact that the dangers of this journey were too extreme, and the fact that he spent longer and longer times in detention, and tried to convince him that he could make a life in Honduras. And he did, and he stayed in Honduras, but was feeling very despondent over the fact that he didn't know how he was going to make ends meet or what would happen. One of the things he was able to do was to find a fairly safe place to live. While he was listening to the radio one day, he heard an announcement that the Lutheran World Federation had a program that worked with deported and returned migrants, and gave a phone number that he could call. And even though he didn't believe that there probably was any truth to that, he thought there was really nothing for him to lose. So he called, and he got in touch with Santiago Vargas, who you'll see in that picture, who's the man in the white right there. Santiago had a chance to talk with him about who he was, where he was, what he was doing, and he was able to enter that program. And through a very, very small grant, he was able to realize his dream of starting a metal shop. And there he is in his metal shop in Honduras. If you want to hear him in his own voice, you can go to the Amparo Facebook page where he was interviewed when we had a chance to talk with him when we saw him in March of 2019. And at this point, the business is growing. He has no interest in migrating, trying the migrant journey again, and he is satisfied. But in addition to getting the ability to start this micro enterprise, he was able to benefit from psychosocial trauma counseling. Everybody who is a part of this program has an opportunity to have psychosocial trauma counseling, either in a group, or if the case is serious enough, is private psychosocial trauma counseling. And so his life is moving forward as he wanted to see it move forward. The young lady that is on the right was deported, was actually returned from Mexico. She made it to Mexico, was arrested by federal authorities and really had no options there, and ended up being returned. She too didn't feel that she had anything that would be welcoming to her to come back, but was able to participate in this program. But one of the really unique things that has happened as a result of this program is that these young people, these two plus all the rest of them that are in the communities there, have formed a network of returned and deported migrants that is actually trying to make changes in the municipalities where they live, and make a change so that that other youth don't feel they have to make the migrant journey. They're also one of the few national networks made up of deported and returned migrants that's actually able to speak out on behalf of migrant youth in the country. And so this is a way part of the way that root causes can be changed, by trying to make sure to see that corruption is dealt with in the municipalities, as well as being able to try to look to see that youth can have the opportunities so that they can feel that they're safe and stay in their communities. So that's the work that happens internationally. In the United States, as of Sunday, we now have 199 welcoming and sanctuary congregations across the ELCA. And you can see all the little orange stars where these congregations are located. And we have the green stars are the 36 Amparo and immigration task forces that we have in 36 different synods, across the ELCA. The black stars are the 5 sanctuary synods, who are also organized and all of them have sanctuary committees that are helping to lead the work of sanctuary in their synods. So what does a welcoming congregation do? A welcoming congregation doesn't necessarily have to make a financial commitment, but makes some very important commitments of accompaniment. First, to spiritually welcome migrants into its ministry. Second, to physically accompany migrants. That could mean going to an ICE check-in. That could mean helping parents get their children into schools. It could also mean going to court if they have a court hearing. The congregations also pray for justice for migrant children and families and advocate for justice. So those are the 4 commitments that a welcoming congregation makes. So who knows, maybe number 200 will actually be among one of the congregations that are represented on this call. We'll have to see how that happens. And each congregation is doing a lot of different kinds of activities. You can't really generalize across the whole group. Many of you may, though, have seen the story featured in Living Lutheran in March of this year. This is Faith in Okemos, Michigan. They're probably one of the congregations that's done one of the heavier lifts. They were contacted by a local social service organization that was very concerned about the fact that young men who were aging out of juvenile detention before they had an opportunity to be placed with their families or be placed in any kind of other setting were being taken into custody upon their 18th birthday. ICE would actually show up on their birthday, and that would be their birthday present, as they would move from the children's detention facility where they were into adult detention, where they would remain until their case was finished. So the social service agency asked Faith if there was anything they could do to change that picture. And they happened to have an empty parsonage. So what they did was they They fitted that parsonage out so that it could be a home for these young men. And they started this in 2017. At this point, they've helped 10 to 12 young men actually move forward with their lives, finish their education, get the jobs that they wanted to get, save the money that they needed so they could move out and get an apartment and be able to move on and finish their cases without having to be in detention, which is really an important piece as well. I just had an opportunity to be on a phone call with Faith and a number of the congregations in Northwest Lower Michigan around them, and Pastor Ellen told us that the week before they had just accepted another young man into the program, and they were really happy about how this program has blessed their congregation in so many important ways. Not every congregation will make that kind of commitment, but that's one example. One of the things that's important to take a look at right now is actually what's happening at our border. As you probably all know, we are still subject to Title 42 in the sense that the majority of the people who come to our southwest border are actually being turned back from the border and not being admitted. The exceptions are for children, unaccompanied children, as well as vulnerable families. And there are some organizations that have been able to work with vulnerable families to try to get them admitted to the United States. Also, vulnerable families include parents who have children under the age of 7, as well as women who are pregnant. So we have seen more families coming into the United States. So recent statistics will show that out of the 700,000 people who have come to our southern border since October 1st of last year, 500 and some thousand of them have been turned back. So even though we're hearing about a huge number of people who are coming into the United States, principally unaccompanied children, you can see that the majority of people still are not being admitted to the United States. Although I can say that the 60,000 people in the MPP process who had previously been turned back from our border before Title 42 is in effect through a process called the Migrant Protection Protocols are slowly being admitted to the United States. Of that 60,000, we've seen 10% of them coming into ports of entry and being placed in the US. Those people, you may have heard that at some ports of entry, a number of ports of entry, there was a process called metering. And this is where people would have to put their names on a list and wait for their turn to be able to go to Customs and Border Patrol to see if they could be admitted to the United States. These lists were often held by social service organizations in the area, sometimes municipal authorities, sometimes by people that we might not even expect, but there is no process right now for people who are involved in metering to be able to enter the United States. As a result of the numbers that we have been seeing, we have a new opportunity for congregational asylum seeker sponsorship, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We also have some incredible opportunities for advocacy, and so I would encourage you to actually be a follower of our ELCA Facebook page so that you will be able to see some of the latest news about what's happening and participate in the advocacy that's available, as well as through the ELCA Advocacy Network. So if your congregation would be considering whether or not you would like to sponsor a migrant that comes into the United States from the southwest border, either an individual, couple, or a family, here are some criteria that you could consider, or that you need to consider, about whether or not that could be viable for your congregation. First of all, obviously, you're going to have the approval of your leadership to explore this whole concept and possibly follow through with it. Your congregation will need to have the capacity to create a team of people who will be committed to work together for at least a year or more, probably 2 years. And the team should be at least no less than 5 to 6 people, and needs to include at least 1 or 2 people or several people that can communicate in the asylee's language. I've heard of some people saying, well, Google has improved, and yes, that may be true, but I still think that it is very critical at this point in time for real communication to take place, that you have this kind of language fluency. A congregation will need the capacity to raise funds to cover costs for food, clothing, shelter, housing, medical care, and legal fees. So that's where this is a bigger job than one congregation can do, and probably includes a network of congregations. And that's what we're seeing across the country. It's important that cross-cultural training and racial justice work is either happening or has happened in the congregation. And not just with the team that's working directly with the asylum-seeking persons or family, but also for the congregation itself, because as the congregation interacts with that person or the family, there is finally a very critical need to connect the asylee with legal services, because that will really make or break the case. The statistics are staggering about the difference that a lawyer can make when representation is possible for an asylum seeker, as opposed to someone who has to go into court and defend themselves. So those are some of the preliminary criteria that you can consider about whether or not your congregation might be in a position to connect with sponsoring an asylum seeker. The ELCA is really blessed to have 11 guardian angel programs, and we would have 12 if the courts would open again, because Arlington, Virginia has a whole group of people who've been waiting for their training since February, and we're planning to open a new program in Arlington, Virginia. Houston, Texas is actually looking at whether they can start a program. One of their congregations is going to be the leader in that. The guardian angel programs are the physical presence of the church in the courtroom. And what this means is we send church people in twos to go to the court to accompany unaccompanied children and their families and their sponsors as they go through the court process. They're there before they go into court to pray with them that justice might be done. They're there to answer their questions if they can, maybe connect them with other services, especially legal services if they don't have lawyers. They are there during the court hearing to be an extra pair of eyes on the court, and they're there afterwards to make sure when people leave they understand what the next steps that they need to take are, and what they need to do before they come back to court. They are also able to connect people that they see with congregations that can that can walk with people, as we were talking about welcoming congregations would do. So the guardian angels are really the eyes of the church on the courtroom. I was recently, and normally we send people 2 by 2. I was in a meeting earlier, probably a couple of days ago, with the Rocky Mountain Synod, and they have a guardian angel program. And one of the people in the program said, I was thinking here I am in court, and what am I doing here? I just feel like maybe my function isn't really all that important. And the coordinator of the program said, well, have you been forgetting to pray for justice as you're part of this whole process? And she said, yeah, I realized that. But then she said, as I sat there with my partner in the courtroom, I realized we were the only people in that courtroom except for the people that were in front of the judge. And it feels like such a secret process, because in immigration courts often there are not that many observers. And she said, I realized that we were representing the whole church community as we sat there watching that judge make his decision, and he knew that the church was watching him. And so that's part of it. But we've also had some pretty dramatic stories, where in one case in Boston, Massachusetts, they were able to save a young man who had gotten to court because of a mistake on the time in his paperwork after his court hearing had taken place, and save him from a deportation order that he would have had to have reopened in the future, just because of their vigilance about who was there and who needed to be served by the judge. So it is a very important way of serving. Some of you may know that there are 92 verses in the Bible that talk about welcoming the stranger. We have 40 of those collected on a bookmark, and that's a fairly interesting educational possibility for you to do in Lent or some other time by taking the 40-day I Was a Stranger Bible and Prayer Challenge. It's reading one verse a day that talks about the stranger, welcoming the stranger, and praying about what God is asking you to do in terms of this verse that you're seeing. One of my favorite verses is Romans 12:13. Don't quit in hard times, pray all the harder, help the needy, and be inventive in hospitality. And that's really what we're called to do in this time as the people of faith accompanying migrants coming to our southern border or coming into the United States, however they may come. Advocacy is critical, and as I said, we have Giovanna Oaxaca, who is in the ELCA Advocacy Office in Washington, D.C., as our Program Director for Migration Policy. And here are 4 of the principles that the guiding principles that she uses in advocating in DC. But what I want to tell you is these 4 principles were established not just by ELCA Amparo, but together with our companions in Central America and Mexico. And these are the 4 tenets of advocacy that we all hold in common. And how they may look for advocacy in Honduras, of course, is going to differ than how they will look in the United States. But they're the same 4 things that we're working on all across, the Americas. One is to strengthen the protections for vulnerable migrants, to defend the rights of migrants, to address root causes, and to create an awareness of the link between internally displaced peoples and what is called irregular migration, which means someone who feels they have to migrate without the benefits of having a visa or some other legal status that would document them as they would come to the border. What's really fascinating is these 4 tenets were actually agreed upon way back in 2017. Right now, because there's been a change of administration, Giovanna, together with our companions, are evaluating these very same principles to determine whether they're still valuable at this moment in time and whether they need any changes. But we're also looking at some of the new things that have happened and seeing whether there are more principles around advocacy, guiding principles that need to be added at this point in time. Articulation. What we have seen is because of the great success of the programs that we have through Amparo, our companions in South America said, so why is it only the churches in Mexico and Central America who are able to benefit from being members of Amparo? And so now, especially because of the larger numbers of Venezuelan migrants, we also have migrants, and we've had lots of people fleeing from Haiti, people fleeing from Nicaragua, and because of the many different causes that bring migrants moving around in our region, we have been able to bring about the continentalization of Amparo, so that the lessons that have been learned in Central America are able to be applied, for example, in Colombia and in Peru, especially where large numbers of Venezuelan migrants are found. One of the things that happened right before COVID set in was there was a request by our companions in South America to learn more about what psychosocial trauma counseling looked like, so that they could add that component as a component of the programs that they were doing in Peru and also in Colombia. And we were able to fortunately get that consultation in under the wire so that they could have that information and could be able to work with it. So articulation occurs among our companions working with the migrant population within a given country, which means that the church in El Salvador and its Pastoral del Migrante has a whole network of other organizations and churches that it works with in terms of local advocacy in El Salvador. And it's fabulous that what we have learned is that the Pastoral del Migrante of the Salvadoran Lutheran Church is one of the few groups that is actually working with deported and returned migrants in that area. And so they've been able to take a very strong stand in helping to bring about changes and helping to change the situation. But we also have our network of relationships, that international relationships has brought about a connection with all of our companions with each other. You may have heard quite a bit about the caravans moving around that had left Honduras. In fact, there still are some caravans that have attempted to leave Honduras and have had varying success in being able to get out of the country, some getting as far as Guatemala, some even entering in the southern part of Mexico. And whenever that happens, our companions are in touch with each other to help protect the rights of the people that are in this movement through the migrant corridor. But also, articulation means that in the United States, we are standing up to racism and actually working together with with other organizations to show that Black and brown lives matter. And that means saying no to Islamophobia, stamping out anti-Semitism, and working together for the protection of all people. That's part of the work that we actually are more invited into as a result of becoming a sanctuary denomination. So one of the questions that's generally asked is, does Amparo only work with Central Americans or only work with people from Central America and Mexico? And the answer really is no, because we have congregations all over the country who are doing work with migrants from all over the world and that are in their community, and that's all part of this as well. And we have a new alliance, with organizations that are doing refugee resettlement. And what we've actually found is, as a result of the numbers of refugees not being resettled in the United States, is almost all of our social service organizations have now taken a new interest in accompanying asylum seekers. So our hope is that someday we will see a system that is as strong as it is for refugee resettlement for those that are asylum seekers as well. And that's something that we need to see happen. So here is some information about the resources that will help raise awareness about Amparo. You can go to our page at elca.org. You should sign up for the elca.org advocacy network and be able to participate in advocacy. As I mentioned, our Facebook page always has the latest news about what's happening around immigration, and if you follow it, you'll be able to see it. And now we have a blog in which we are able to present more information, more in-depth information on certain subjects. So here are some ways to get involved. First, connect to Amparo as a welcoming congregation and engagement with migrants in your community and migrant community organizations. You can build awareness through educational events. There is congregational asylum seeker sponsorship, and while we do not have a formal process for that, we are connected to the Southwest Texas Synod, and they have regularly been seeing families in need of placement and individuals in need of congregational sponsorship, and they're always willing to, when they know that a congregation is interested, to ask congregations to get involved by accepting individuals or families. Right now, immersion experiences are not happening, but once that becomes possible, you will be able to learn about root causes in Central America as there's the opportunity to travel and to visit all of the marvelous ministries that we have that are walking with the deported and returned migrants in Central America. There is a possibility, well, Madison's a little too far from Chicago for a Guardian Angel program, but as you accompany migrants in your community, if they are going to court in Chicago, know that there is a Chicago Guardian Angel program, and all you have to do is be in touch with me, and I can get people to court to be there to accompany any of the people you have going to court. Advocacy is critical right now. We're especially trying to see if we can shut down family detention for good, because we don't believe families should be in detention. We're also working on trying to see if we can get the U.S. Citizenship Act passed. You can volunteer at migrant shelters, pray for justice, and give to support the work. So those are some of the opportunities to get involved right now. And I'm going to end right there and just open it up for questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary, for this presentation. It was very informative. I think we'll serve for some great questions. So if anyone has any questions that they want to reach out, we've already gotten some great questions through direct message, but feel free to put them in the chat or to put them out or directly to me. The first question that we had was, how much of your focus at Amparo is on direct aid to unaccompanied minors and their family, and how much is on advocating for just policy on their behalf?
You broke. I think we just had some wind go through here, so I heard the first part. I didn't hear the first part, but the second part was how much was advocacy. So
yeah, so how much of the focus or your time or resources is spent towards direct aid and on advocacy? What's kind of the balance and focus and priority there?
Well, I would say it's probably close to 50-50 because I'm the organizer and Giovanna is the advocacy person, and so she's full-time working on the advocacy, and I'm doing more of the organizational work. In terms of the financial piece of it, though, what I would say is that probably 70% of the money that Amparo has goes into services internationally. And that means our companions working with deported and returned migrants. It means the advocacy that happens that I didn't talk a lot about at all in Mexico. We have companions in Mexico who are trying to change the law so that migrants can be protected in Mexico. And recently they had a really big win. It used to be that Central American children were not treated with any of the same rights or the services that Mexican children would be treated or receive, and they changed that. So that should take place so that Mexican children, so that Central American children should be able to have those same rights and receive those same services. The big question is whether the Mexican government will fund much of that. But at least that was the first step of even making anything happen, because the system in Mexico was very, very difficult for children. Even once they had won their asylum cases, which first of all was tough to do, they would be in custody until they turned 18, with no foster care, with no services, with no school. So we're hopeful that this is going to change the picture there.
Awesome, thank you. Next question comes from Tony. She asked, does ELCA Amparo provide cross-cultural training and racial justice programs to congregations? I know you mentioned that was kind of an item you needed to have down before you could do some of these things. So do you provide those programs?
Well, Amparo has not done a lot with that. We have looked at other ELCA resources that are available through our director for racial justice is now Jen De Leon, who is very deeply familiar with immigration issues and very passionate about them. So I know something more will happen. But the previous director, Judith Roberts, was able to give congregations access to some incredible racial justice training through a program called Transforming White Privilege. And she was able to get a very, very important cost-saving deal for congregations who wanted to participate in this really excellent program, which has about 16 sessions for the cost of $200. It's a program that can be done online. I think the most important piece of it is to have a team that would teach it, that would actually have been through racial justice training, but all of the materials are there for that. So that's one of the programs that I would also highly recommend that people consider doing. The ELCA has done accompaniment training, and so we do have that available too. As well, and we have done cross-cultural training, particularly through some of the events we've had. And we're looking at how there will be more education opportunities available. One of the exciting things our team has just decided to do together is to bring the churches together, congregations from the United States as well as congregations from all of the Americas. This is going to be in Spanish, to talk about xenophobia and strategies that congregations have had in dealing with xenophobia in their communities. One of our Amparo network members is Pastor Moises Perez, who is in Mexico City. He's actually a professor. He was a professor at the Comunidad Teológica there, and he has been working very hard in the Iglesia Luterana Mexicana to change xenophobic attitudes. So he's going to be in through theological studies, Bible studies, and so he's going to be sharing some of that, as well as some of our other companions will be sharing that.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question comes from Barbara. She wanted your perspective on El Salvador. She asked, what does Mary think about what's happening in El Salvador? Most of our friends there are really happy with what is happening in the government. They see it as about time that the old corrupt power holders got kicked out. Any thoughts or perspective on that?
I would defer to Walter on that one. I think I've heard both sides of that issue, and in fact, I've heard people arguing both sides of that issue. I think when any president has a supermajority, there can be a problem because I don't think the balance of power is there. But I know that there are a couple different opinions on that one. I do know that the Biden administration is very concerned and has expressed concerns about that very issue. And actually Vice President Harris has said that she does not see that conditions might be ripe for trying to discuss what could possibly happen in El Salvador around migration issues, just because of the particular way in which things have been happening recently. So I guess that's all I'll say.
Sure. One thing that was asked us about people returning, returning migrants. What are some unique, challenges or obstacles that they may face returning back to their place of origin?
Well, several things. First of all, they've been traumatized either before they left, but for sure in the journey itself, or with their experiences in being deported back to countries of origin. And so depression is a very serious problem. It's not just for the person themselves, but their whole family and community looks at them as failures. And one of the things another challenge that often even young children have faced when they've been deported from the United States, particularly in Guatemala, is that they are looked at as being criminals. It's the idea, if you've been deported, you must have been a criminal. So that whole message has gotten out there, even though there's no reality behind it. And so even young children often have struggles getting back into schools because the schools don't want to take them. And so that's where a program, like POPNUC in Guatemala has to actually accompany kids and their parents to try to force the school to let them in to even get the education that they're supposed to have. So that's one of the issues, xenophobia and labeling as criminals. But the second issue is that people have usually used all of their resources to even make the migrant journey, and when they come back, they have nothing. And the governments do not provide much more than a reception center that might take a look, give them a quick medical exam. It might be, they may get a quick psychological exam. They might get a humanitarian food basket, but that's all they get. Basically, they're done in 2 hours, and it's like, well, go home now and see what you can do with yourself. And that's not enough. So it often means that there's a revolving cycle of people wanting to take the migrant journey. And one of the things I didn't mention, but I think is really important to know, is that our companions, when they started these programs to work with people who had been deported and returned, really thought that maybe they'd be successful in 50% of the cases. But when they started looking at their success rates are actually 88 to 95%. And what that means is that 88 to 95% of the people who have passed through the program at that moment do not wish to make the migrant journey again. I mean, things can change. There could be a new threat that would force that to happen. But at least people find that they have gotten the resources they need to try to make lives that will be livable in the countries of origin.
Wow, great! That sounds that's shocking to me, honestly, that the success rate is that high.
To them too. Everybody was astonished by that. And 95% is really the success rate with children, obviously. You know, that's so our companions that work with the younger children have great success rates.
Sure. Bianca asks, do the companions in home countries have to contend with militia or gangs?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. In fact, the programs themselves have to contend with that. The Mennonite Social Action Commission that does the work in San Pedro Sula works in a very, very difficult, gang-ridden territory, such that the small businesses that are started by migrants in those communities often are like cell phone repair and other things that can be done out of briefcases so that they can move around and not be detected. There was actually Bishop Eaton was able to accompany us in March of 2019, and she was scheduled to go to a particular street corner where she was going to meet somebody who had a small business on that street corner. And word came out that the gang was going to have a strong presence there, and so that she didn't go there, and neither did the person who was going to go there that day. I mean, it's a question of being able to move around. In fact, we met a young man who said that he can never be in the same city twice, so he takes his little business in his briefcase from one town to another on buses because he can never be seen in the same place. And he's able to get his business done that way. Yes, there is a great impact, and quite honestly, we have lost a couple of the beneficiaries of the program. I think the last one was in November of 19. Was the last one that died. It was a young woman, 27 years old, and she was a mother of a 4-year-old, and the gang just took her down in her area. So it's not always a success, but we have been able to see more success than not.
Sure, and that kind of pivots well to a ton of questions that we've been getting about how churches and congregations can help if they wanted to donate a Sunday offering or help with food pantries or clothing drives or help unaccompanied minors or undocumented folks in any way. What would be the best way that you would recommend to do that or to give?
Well, obviously they can contribute to the international work through ELCA Amparo. We do have ministries like Border Servant Corps and Iglesia Luterana Cristo Rey in El Paso that actually have immersion experiences and work directly with the shelters in their places, and also shelters across the river in Ciudad Juarez. So there are opportunities to provide some assistance there. In terms of the unaccompanied children, LIRS is well known to be working in that area and has been making a very great effort to get these kids out of these larger facilities and sometimes into even short-term foster care while studies are being done so they can be placed with their family members. Because you should know that probably 90% of the kids unaccompanied children that come into the United States already have family members that they can be united with. And it's just a question of being able to make sure that it's a safe placement. And the government has been trying to do that as quickly and expeditiously as possible. We would still like to see them do it a little bit faster even now than they are, because of the large numbers that are getting stuck in facilities that really aren't for children. We have a lot of temporary shelters and facilities that have been set up that really are not for children. They're better than Customs and Border Patrol, but they're still not the kind of facilities that children should have. We know that the administration has increased the number of beds through the Office of Refugee Resettlement where these children can go. And so we're seeing that population go down, but it still needs to go down even further.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. As we approach time here, we had a request from Christy for the contact information for the Guardian Angel program in Chicago.
Well, that would be me, so that'll be an easy one.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And, I personally had a question of where we could find the 40-day prayer challenge bookmark and where we can.
online in our resources, but we have them all printed out. And if you send me an email, I can send them out in packs of 50, and you can get them in Arabic and traditional Chinese as well. So we're hoping to have them in many, many more languages as time goes on. One of the things that we're working on in a number of contexts is whether we could get welcome centers set up in communities so that migrants would know that there's a place, no matter what group they pertain to, that they can go to get word about the services that are available. And so that has required us to think about getting these bookmarks in different languages.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. We have one more question from Tim. Sorry to anyone couldn't get to all of the questions this evening, but this is obviously heavy work, tough work often. And Tim asked, what gives you hope as you look out, as you do this work and continue to look into the future?
Well, what really gives me hope is to be able to see the passion of the congregations engaging in ministry. I mean, it gives me hope. Emails like Tony talking about what Midvale is doing to try to accompany asylum seekers, in their community there. And just the breadth and the depth of people's willingness to get involved. Congregations, like in Bayfield, Wisconsin, accepting a family of Russians who are asylum seekers recently, and just putting together a network of people to help this family find a new life. Things like that give me hope.
Great. Well, Mary, thank you so much for your time and for your presentation and for your expertise. I know that we all really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for listening tonight.
Awesome. So as we pivot, mentioned ways to get involved and kind of next steps. And so, Mary shared many resources and places that you can go through the Amparo network. I also wanted to highlight some additional both Amparo resources as well as resources a little bit closer to home with the Lutheran Office for Public Policy in Wisconsin. So we often share action alerts to get involved on things around immigration policy, as well as our other other 4 priorities. So I will put the link in the chat if you would like to sign up for action alerts through that. You can also go to elca.org/Amparo for resources on the work and other ways that you can get involved. I see actually at the top there are the bookmarks there, so you can get any of those resources. And then for updates or for any other information, please follow us, the Amparo or LPPW or the South Central Synod of Wisconsin on Facebook. So thank you all so much as we wrap up this hour for joining us for our second discussion on the Standing with Our Neighbors series. So thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.